You grew up in a house with Bob Dylan. You wouldn't have a sense of humor either.
Yeah.
Let me say, do you ever get to talk to Bob Dylan?
Right,
he was not a good father.
I definitely do a lot.
Is he a good father, Bob Dylan? To be honest.
Absolutely.
No, be serious. He was not a good father.
Led by Bob Dylan's youngest child, Jakob, the Wallflowers would have one of the biggest records of the mid-90s. But the path to get there wasn't easy, as the band went through a lot of internal turmoil in their early years and the months leading up to their breakout record. Let's talk about how the band got so popular. Born in 1969 in New York City to Bob Dylan and his then model wife Sarah, Jakob's family resided in an apartment near Bleecker Street, which was home to the thriving 60s-era Greenwich Village folk music scene. After spending some short stints in Arizona and New Mexico, the family settled in California by the time Jakob was 3. But by 1977, his parents divorced and they shared joint custody of their son. When it came to school, he was a D average student in high school from grades 9 to 11. And while academics weren't his strong point, he did have a strong musical education thanks to, of course, his own father and his older brothers, whose record collections consisted heavily of British acts like The Clash, Elvis Costello, as well as the Buzzcocks, in addition to North American acts like Tom Waits and Neil Young and Stevie Wonder. Jakob would sometimes accompany his dad on the road, with probably one of the most memorable moments happening when he toured with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in 1986. Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell recalled to Rolling Stone, "We were in Australia, 2 or 3 of the kids were there. Jakob was always watching, kind of quiet. I don't know if I said more than hi to him at the time, but he was paying very close attention to what was going down." Jakob, meanwhile, would add in the same article, "I started to see people I really admired, how they reacted to the whole thing of meeting Bob Dylan. I wouldn't want to mention their names. These were my heroes, and I'm watching them melt on the floor. I saw that countless times, and I started to figure out why." Dylan would remark in several interviews that attending a concert by The Clash when he was just 12 years old made him realize that he wanted to be a musician. It was in high school Jakob played in a variety of bands, including being the guitar player in his friend's group Trash Matinee, who would put out an EP in 1987. It was the same year that Jakob was 17 when he met the man who would later go on to manage the Wallflowers, a guy named Andrew Slater. Slater at the time was in the studio producing Warren Zevon's record Sentimental Hygiene. It was a record that featured Bob Dylan on harmonica on one song. For that session, Bob brought his son Jakob, and by this point Jakob was now in a band called the Boot Heels with future Wallflower guitarist Toby Miller. Miller and Dylan had met in the 5th grade and bonded over their love of British musical acts, of course The Clash and The Jam most notably. The pair started playing music together by the 8th grade. It was around 1988 or so that Jakob wanted to go beyond just playing guitar, and he soon got into songwriting, telling the Sydney Morning Herald in 1992, "I just fell into this role 4 or 5 years ago because I wasn't satisfied with being just a guitarist in a band. Now I find that songwriting comes pretty naturally." It was after graduating high school, Dylan moved back to New York City, and he enrolled himself in the Parsons School of Design to study art. But within his first day of showing up on campus, he realized school wasn't for him. Within the first semester, he dropped out of school and returned home to LA. He'd once again meet up with his friend Toby Miller, whose band, the 45s, had just broken up, and so they started a new group called the Apples, which Jakob fronted and played guitar in. They would take inspiration from groups like The Clash and The Replacements. They'd go through several lineup changes before adding Barry Maguire on bass and Peter Janowitz on drums. Originally, the band had keyboardist Money Mark playing with them, but it would be short-lived, as future Foo Fighters keyboardist Rami Jaffe would be the last member added to the lineup. He was almost like a mythical figure, playing in multiple bands at the time, as Jakob would tell Nylon magazine. "The band had been together for about 3 years, just guitar, bass, and drums. I had always wanted a keyboard player. This was 1988-89. We just asked around and everyone would say, well, there's Rami Jaffe, but he won't join a group." Dylan would meet with Jaffe at the kibbutz room in the back of the famous Cantor's Deli on Fairfax, and the two headed for Dylan's car to listen to the band's demo tape. Impressed, Jaffe joined the band. But for the first 2 weeks in the group, Jaffe didn't know Jacob's last name. The keyboardist remarked to Rolling Stone, "He just said he was Jake. I was not a last name guy. I didn't care." When the band finally hit the road later on, it finally made more sense to Jaffe why Jakob didn't use his last name, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It was by 1990, Slater, that producer and manager who Jakob met in 1987, heard a tape of a band called The Apples from a friend of his girlfriend. Interested, he went to see the band play in LA at a party, and he was shocked to see the quiet kid of Bob Dylan he met 3 years earlier fronting the group, telling Rolling Stone he had long hair parted down the middle, one of the most striking guys I've ever seen, and he had a great voice. Slater would remark in a separate interview how Jakob had a great sense of melody, and when it came to writing lyrics, he was wiser than your typical 22-year-old songwriter. Slater was, of course, also taken aback by the band's rehearsal space at a $5 an hour place in LA called Fortress Studio, referring to it as, and I quote, place in LA. Slater recalled thinking to himself how Jakob could get any piece of gear he wanted, but instead, he was in this awful rehearsal space, and he kind of liked that about him. Jakob, for his part, never had a job as he was living in his mother's house at the time, with his sole focus being songwriting. One of his bandmates did, however, deliver Chinese food, so when Jakob needed some extra money, he'd pick up his friend's shift. It was around this time the Apples soon became the Wallflowers. Jakob was pretty evasive about what exactly the name meant, but he would remark it was a non-intrusive, unpretentious name that sounded nice and mellow. Slater would soon convince the group to record a demo, which they reluctantly did. He would play that demo that the Wallflowers recorded for Virgin Records co-chairman Jeff Iroff, who didn't know Jacob's last name. Virgin signed the group, with Slater recalling to the LA Times that those early shows the band played saw him forbid clubs from advertising Jacob's name when promoting the gig. In the Wallflowers' early years, and even after they got signed to Virgin, they became regulars at the kibbutz room at the back of Cantor's Deli. Janowitz would remark how Cantor's Deli was one of the few places the band felt comfortable enough to hang out and embarrass themselves. But those gigs, which mostly consisted of friends, soon blossomed to something bigger, with big-name celebrities and industry people stopping by to check out the band, including Lenny Kravitz and Jackson Browne. It was within a few short years Cantor's Deli soon became an industry fishing hole for labels looking to sign acts. The Wallflowers, along with Tongues and Tails and the Freewheelers, were credited as first establishing the kibbutz as a hotspot. The band's first record, which was self-titled, was co-produced by the band as well as their manager and Paul Fox. Fox had previously worked with 10,000 Maniacs, the Sugar Cubes, and XTC. Jakob was insistent that everything be recorded using analog recording equipment, even forgoing using headphones, so no one could hear individual parts. The frontman would tell the Toronto Star if someone choked on a note, there was nothing they could do about it. It was going to end up on the record. Because of the band's recording approach, word had gotten around in the industry that the Wallflowers were now holding the torch for live classic recording, something they brushed off. Instead, they claimed it had more having to do with feeling comfortable. Dylan would write 23 songs for the group's debut album, with them only using about a dozen tracks. He would share some similarities with his father, telling the Toronto Sun that he was not a fan of the 3-minute pop tunes, with only one song on their debut album clocking close to that length, while another track, Honeybee, clocks in at over 9 minutes. Released on August 25, 1992, the group's self-titled album saw their label and management send the album to radio programmers and critics with no hype or flashy video. The album's front and back covers, as well as the band's bio that Virgin distributed, made no mention of Jakob's father. In fact, Jakob avoided doing any press for the album until after it came out. He wanted the music to do the talking. The Wallflowers soon hit the road, playing alongside 10,000 Maniacs, in addition to the Spin Doctors and Cracker. 2 singles would be released from the album, including Ashes to Ashes and Shy of the Moon, neither of which charted. As you can imagine, once it got out who Jakob Dylan was, the press brought up the comparisons to his father, and awkwardly brought up his name in interviews. Jakob was of course weary of the press, and you couldn't blame him given the scrutiny rock musicians' kids received like Ziggy Marley, Julian Lennon, and Wilson Phillips. Many artists have been previously labeled as being the new Dylan, and being Bob Dylan's son, of course, came with a lot of comparisons. Plus, Jakob didn't want to get too detailed about his father, respecting his privacy. Couple this with big fans of his dad showing up to the Wallflowers concerts, with Rolling Stone writing, the Dylan freaks came out of the woodwork, hippie loons with 20-page letters for Jakob to pass on to his dad. You think the young girls were there, Jaffe asks. People our age? No way. It wasn't uncommon for members of the audience to even yell out Bob Dylan songs to play, which the band ignored. Jakob would tell an interviewer, if somebody's not wearing my t-shirt, they're wearing someone else's that looks familiar to me. I've got a good idea why they're there. I'm glad they spent money on the show, but I really don't want to talk to them. As for how the critics reacted to the Wallflowers sound, they were frequently referred to as a modern-day version of the legendary rock group The Band, which, funny enough, served as Bob Dylan's backing band in the 60s, and the Wallflowers would even frequently cover the song The Weight. Other publications called them retro, lumping them in with the likes of the Black Crowes. As for how Jakob felt about all the comparisons, he would remark to Rolling Stone, I wasn't interested in being original. It's important to study the craft. Then you can expand and be an individual down the line. Adding to the Sydney Morning Herald, there are about 5 categories they can put you into, and I'm just happy they didn't put us into grunge. Even dance pop would have been preferable to that. Jakob wasn't a fan of grunge, as you can imagine, claiming a lot of the so-called Seattle sound is based on major chords that he was tired of hearing. The Wallflowers' 1992 debut record sold a disappointing 40,000 copies, despite receiving much critical praise. Musician magazine called it an impressive debut by a real rock and roll band. As the group got off the road in 1993, their biggest supporters at Virgin, Jeff Iroff and Jordan Harris, the co-heads of the company, left the label, departing for Sony. Dylan would remark to Alan Scully how the rest of Virgin was indifferent to his band, remarking, I don't think we made the record they wanted us to make. Worried that they wouldn't be a top priority anymore as new people came into the fold, the Wallflowers asked to be released from their contract, which they were. But getting attention wasn't easy. Grunge was the hottest thing at the time, and labels weren't really interested in the 60s rootsy style music the Wallflowers were playing. There were also rumors around Los Angeles that the band had been dropped by their label because they were too difficult to work with, making them damaged goods in a lot of industry people's eyes. Dylan would remark to the LA Times, nobody in the industry wanted to come see us after that. They figured if someone drops us after one record, something must really be wrong. Keep in mind that despite having a well-connected manager, the band struggled to get their calls returned. It resulted in Dylan wondering if he was actually a good musician and wondering whether he should continue leading a band. But there was more trouble ahead. Slowly, one by one, the members minus Dylan and Jaffe left the group. Dylan would be cagey in a lot of interviews, but he would remark to the Salt Lake City Tribune how the lure of side distractions held more sway over the members than the band itself, also hinting that not all the members were pulling their own weight. When it came time to assemble a new lineup, they didn't have to look much further than Hollywood. They reassembled with a new lineup consisting of guitarist Michael Ward, bassist Greg Richling, who Dylan actually went to school with, and studio drummer Matt Chamberlain. Chamberlain would eventually be replaced by Mario Calari. Once Toby Miller left the band, Jakob would tell Spin, Toby was an equal partner and equal visionary. When he left, it became my band. The Wallflowers were now focused on playing 3 to 4 nights a week at clubs around LA. The group's saving grace, though, came in late 1993 when the Wallflowers cut a demo for the song 6th Avenue Heartache at the insistence of their manager. The song made its way to several labels who started to show interest in the group. Interscope, which was home to a lot of rap acts, interestingly enough signed the band in 1994. The Wallflowers would team up with famed producer T-Bone Burnett for their second record. Burnett was actually on Dylan's wish list of producers, being a fan of his work with Elvis Costello, Los Lobos, and the late Roy Orbison. Burnett, interestingly enough, also played guitar in Bob Dylan's band during the 70s. Burnett only took on the project after his wife handed him one of the Wallflowers demos. The band would name their second record Bringing Down the Horse, with Dylan needing to only look back to the band's period in limbo for inspiration, telling an interviewer, "It felt like that," referring to Bringing Down a Horse. The band kind of fell apart. Record companies told me the band wasn't good. Good producers wouldn't work with us. They said the songs weren't great. At one point, it seemed like the band wasn't going to make a record. By the time the Wallflowers showed up to the recording studio, they brought along some songs that actually predated their first record. Sixth Avenue Heartache existed in some form dating as far back to around 1990, but was not included on the first record since they couldn't get a version they were happy with. A lot of the songs on their second album deal with the feeling of defeat, reflecting the difficulties the band were undergoing between the time they left Virgin to when they signed with Interscope. Sixth Avenue Heartache saw the band joined by several high-profile guest musicians, including Adam Duritz of Counting Crows singing background vocals, while Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell contributed slide guitar. The rest of the album also had a number of guest spots. In fact, Dylan would joke with Billboard magazine, "Maybe you don't think you'll like the record because I'm on it, but hey, Adam Duritz is on it. Do you like Michael Penn? Why do you think there are stars on the album cover?" Released in April of 1996 as the first single, Sixth Avenue Heartache would be dropped a few weeks before the album's release. The accompanying music video, directed by Seven director David Fincher, quickly became a buzz clip on MTV by the summer. The song would give the Wallflowers their first charting single, peaking at number 8 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart. As for what the song was about, Dylan revealed it being inspired by that short stint he had in New York when he went to art school. He would recall how the song was about a homeless person who lived across the street from him and sang songs. Dylan remembered feeling a kind of relationship with him even though they weren't in the same situation. Then one day the guy just disappeared and he left his possessions behind, which people started to steal. The label tried to take a low-key approach to try and reintroduce the band and build a slow following. It was by August of '96, the album sold a respectable 90,000 copies. Then the label issued the second single that shot the album through the stratosphere. That single would be One Headlight, which made Billboard history. It became the first single to reach number 1 on all 3 of the Billboard Rock Airplay charts, the Modern Rock Tracks chart, the Mainstream Rock Tracks chart, and the AAA chart. In my home country of Canada, the song was number 1 for 5 weeks. The song would win 2 Grammys, and in early 2021, it topped Billboard's greatest of all time adult alternative songs list. But Dylan was quick to point out that some people misinterpreted the song, telling Rolling Stone, "One Headlight was totally misunderstood. In the last verse, there's a line, 'Her death, it must be killing me.' People kept asking me, 'Who died?' I was like, no, it's a metaphor." The song's lyrics have more to do with the death of ideas, not a physical person, Jakob would recall in a different interview. The song also features a nod to Bruce Springsteen's 1980 song Independence Day. In fact, Bruce Springsteen even performed the song with the Wallflowers at the 1997 MTV VMAs.
And it feels just like a beat of the truck. I turn the engine, but the engine doesn't turn.
The irony of the whole thing was that Jakob wasn't trying to write a hit song, but rather impress a producer that he wanted to work with. Dylan recalled to Spin playing the demo of One Headlight, admitting to the magazine, "I could see him lighting up and I thought, I got him. He finished the song for the 3rd time and said, 'This could be something, this could be really great.' But then he left and I never spoke to him again. He never called." He wouldn't reveal who that producer was. It also may surprise you to know that the label was shocked at how well the first 2 singles did.
Honestly, so much interest was put into that one song. I'm not sure how much anybody believed they had a record that was really going to get over beyond that song. And they got a lot of traction with Sixth Avenue Heartache back in the days of videos.
Right.
And then everybody kind of looked around like happy but totally surprised. Now what? Because usually, you know, the way you do things is, you know, you got this one, so you put that out, which is really going to get you to this one. This is the one you want people to hear.
Right.
But there was no game plan like that. They really thought they had one song.
They didn't think One Headlight was that?
Nobody. I had begged, please make that a single. because I was just really proud of it. I thought it was like best song I could write at the time.
It's a great song.
But it was really it was not really the first choice. Nobody was ramping up to it. They stumbled on, I won't say they stumbled, they worked really hard. And they got a hit song out of that 6th Avenue Heartache, and then they had to kind of figure out what to do next.
The hits kept coming, with the band having another 2 successful singles, with the difference peaking at number 3 and number 5 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and the alternative airplay chart, while 3 Marlenas peaked at number 21 and 17 on the same charts. At the end of the day, the record sold an astounding 6 million copies worldwide, with 4 million of those copies being sold in America. Dylan would credit the record label and a changing musical climate for being more receptive to a band like his. A year after the album came out, the Wallflowers were opening for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it was at one of those sound checks Jakob went up to Mike Campbell and remarked to him, "I want to thank you for giving me a career with that guitar lick in 6th Avenue Heartache." People magazine also named Jakob Dylan the sexiest rock star in 1997. Critics and journalists saw a record that shared as many musical contrasts to his father Bob Dylan, while also offering more contrast with harder rocking tunes. Since it was 1996, the Wallflowers at the time didn't have an official webpage, and their fans set up what one article described as an almost official webpage. The group's second album would be reissued for the first time on 2-disc vinyl for its 20th anniversary in 2016. Dylan was shocked when the sales reached quadruple platinum status, recalling, "Once you get to the 3rd or 4th million, it's like, who's buying this? Can it really mean something to everybody? That's a lot of people." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comment section below, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll Stories.